Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about something that's been in the media recently. It's a political football. Most economic experts don't support it and the government have resisted it. What I'm going to be talking about today is a ban on residential rent increases. In this video I'm going to be discussing the recent bill on rental increase bans, TDs as landlords. Do rental caps and bans actually work? Is it profitable to be a landlord at the moment? And make sure you stay watching to the very end because I will propose some solutions. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Residential rental bans are in the news again. They're in the news again because of a recent bill by Sinn Fein which proposed a rental ban for 3 years on residential property. The bill was defeated by the government, which included Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Green Party and a number of independent TDs. It's not surprising that the bill was defeated. Generally speaking, in most cases, the government will always reject bills that are put forward by the opposition, so there's no surprise in that fact. Why would a sitting government approve a bill that they haven't written? In my mind, the bill was a PR stunt, and a PR stunt by Sinn Féin, which actually seemed to work quite well, because the media picked up on the story. They covered stories about 1 in 4 TDs are landlords. They also covered off stories about conflict of interest on TDs voting on such a bill. I may come across a bit critical of Sinn Féin within this video, and if I do, that's because I am. But also, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael also have to share responsibility mainly because of their inaction to deal with the housing crisis, so they take a larger share of the problem. But Sinn Féin also share a bit of the responsibility too, because they were in charge of Dublin City Council, I think from 2013 to 2019. So they definitely have responsibility for lack of supply in Dublin City Centre. I actually had a look at the Sinn Féin bill to see what it actually suggested. It's quite sparse, there's not a lot of detail in it. It's only 2 or 3 points, and it doesn't go into any detail in regards to how the bill will interact with the current legislation that's in place. It doesn't give clear guidance on regards to how new properties and how new rents will actually be set, and realistically it gives no real good guidance or ideas at all. And with that in mind, I kind of feel in my conclusion at the outset that this is just a PR stunt kind of rings true too. And that PR stunt did work. There was headlines, and the headlines actually did criticise sitting TDs. Headlines such as 1 in 4 TDs are landlords, and that there's a conflict of interest here. And I do agree, if a TD is a landlord and has a large portfolio, definitely there is a conflict of interest. But if a TD has 1 or 2 investment properties or second properties, I actually think that just gives them a better insight into the market itself, and they have a better insight in terms of voting or providing solutions for the actual housing crisis. But while I was actually at it, I had a look at the list of TDs, that the recent list, it's a few years old, but I had a look at the list of TDs that owned a second property or were being classified as landlords. And fair enough, there's 1 or 2 on that list that do have reasonably large property portfolios. But the majority of TDs that are on that list having a second property, they classify them as landlords, as such as 1 in 4 TDs. The majority of the second property that they held was either farmland in their local constituency, their constituency office. In some cases, it was a second residence for a family member. And other cases, it was as ludicrous as having like 10% in a small plot of land, as well as someone holding onto their mother's property. And there was one case where a TD was an executor of an estate, and because of that fact, they were being classed as a landlord. While I do agree that there is a risk of TDs being landlords, that there is a conflict of interest, but I think the reports are being overhyped and sensationalized in regards to this fact. I don't think there's a major conflict of interest for TDs voting on such a bill. I'm not going to be able to get into the whole constitution debate in regards to bans on rent increases. It's not really what I'm kind of going to get into within this video. Within this video, what I'm going to discuss is actually the impacts of rental caps or rental bans, what they actually have on the economy as a whole. The common economic viewpoint is that rental bans or rental caps do not benefit the economy as a whole, and they also have a negative impact on tenants. Rental controls lead to less development. They lead to increased ownership of occupiers, which ultimately leads to less available stock for the rental market. A general rule is you don't get more development if you tax it. In my mind, a rental cap or a rental ban would be a tax on ownership or development. Rental control leads to a lucky few that actually get accommodation, but it generally means that there's an increasing number of people who fail to get any accommodation. In most countries, rent control is limited to a select number of properties. Those properties rents can go up on an annual basis based on an agreed percentage that the councils allow for every year. And also they allow for properties to come out of rental control if certain criteria and improvements are made. History would indicate where rental controls or bans on upper rents are actually put in place, properties fall into disrepair, landlords are slow to make any repairs or improvements, they're not incentivised to keep tenants happy, and conditions for tenants actually worsen and more landlords leave the market. In Ireland, there is legislation at the moment that caps the maximum rental increase to 4%, and that's assuming that the rent in the area has actually gone up by 4%. A landlord is required to prove that market rental levels have gone up by 4% before they can actually impose that on a current tenant. I'm not sure right now that there is a major risk that there's going to be a large increase in rental levels unless more and more landlords actually leave the market. I'm not saying things are absolutely perfect for tenants, but generally speaking, tenants' rights have improved greatly over the last number of years. So looking at the current legislation that's in place in regards to the 4% cap on rent pressure zones, what benefits or what cons have they actually had on the actual market? Well, the benefits are tenants do have more security in the property that they are in. They also know that they can budget for any increase or know what a rough increase is going to be if there is an increase in the market value. But supply has been impacted. The level of supply has gone down, and that is because short-term lettings aren't included within the legislation. Therefore, a large number of landlords took their properties out of the long-term market and moved them into the short-term market. There are reports out there that nearly 17,000 landlords, private landlords, have left the market in the last few years. New landlords have come to the market, particularly here in Dublin. Those new landlords have generally speaking been pension funds and REITs, and they're building new apartment complexes to rent on this build to rent schemes, and they are generally providing serviced apartments for a very high premium rent. There are reports out there that some of these blocks are being left empty, and that probably is the case. The main reason that they're being left empty is they don't want to let them right now during lockdown, because they don't want to lease them for a reduced rent, because once they reduce the rent, that crystallizes the rent on their books, and ultimately they'll have to take a write down on value. Even small landlords are actually keeping units vacant during lockdown, so they don't get stuck into a situation where they've let their property at a very low rent and are stuck at only increasing at a 4% cap for the next number of years. This further highlights why caps don't work in the tenant's favour and also reduce the level of supply. I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that are going to say, well, landlords are creaming it and making an absolute fortune. And to be fair, rents have gone up in the last few years. But with new introductions of new legislation as well as new taxes, it is estimated that the cost of holding a residential investment property has increased by 24% over the last 3 years. It's also important to remember that most landlords aren't large pension funds or investment funds. Most landlords actually only hold 1 or 2 properties. It's estimated that 70% of the available stock are held by a landlord that has 2 or less properties. Most of those landlords are actually paying tax at 52% on their rental income, and some studies have found that in some cases landlords have paid as much as 80% tax on an investment property when you add in local property tax and stamp duty. I really believe it's important not to tax the private landlords out of the market. It's like cutting your nose off to spite your face. A recent KPMG report reviewed the annual returns of private landlords, and they made the following conclusion. The financial returns are negligible when compared to the value of the property, given the risk and the efforts involved. It's not just taxes that are forcing landlords to leave the market. There's an increase in time and effort and cost that it takes to deal with problem tenants, which is putting a lot of landlords off actually staying within the system too. I'm not saying it's impossible to make money in property. What I am saying is that it's far easier for you to make money in property if you are a large fund or pension fund, or you structure your investment correctly, particularly if you buy a property through your own personal pension. All I'm saying is that it's far harder than people actually think it is to make money as a landlord. Let's just say you buy a property in Dublin for 430,000. You rent it out for 2,300 per month. When you add in all your costs that you have for the year, including perhaps you might have service charge, repairs, property tax, insurance, letting fees, void charges, management charges, repairs, everything that goes on with running a property, you might actually have a net cash flow of, say, 1,500 per month. If you have borrowed to buy this investment property, you may have borrowed a 70% loan to value ratio. You may be lucky enough to get a 4% interest rate. That's if you're lucky. And let's just say you've got a 20-year term. That's again being lucky, because in most cases they'll only give you a 15-year term. In this case, you are paying 1,400 in interest and capital every single month. That would leave you with a cash positive position of €100 a month, or €1,200 per year. Your actual tax bill on that property may be anywhere between 5 and 6 grand a year. Therefore, you're going to be in a negative cash position. Again, I'm not saying you can't make money in property. You definitely can. You definitely can make good money as a landlord. There's plenty of landlords out there that are making good money. But I'm just saying that the example that I've just given there is probably a pretty good reflection on the majority of landlords that are out there. And I think that is highlighted with KPMG's report as well, where they reviewed the annual returns of landlords and came to the conclusion that it's not financially viable to actually be a landlord in Ireland given the current tax situation. With that in mind, actually, I think what people might be suggesting is you'd be better off taking your 30% deposit and putting it in an investment fund and letting it sit there for 15 years. It's far less work and it's probably far more tax efficient as well. Rental stabilisation is a good economic goal to have. The 4% cap on rental increases is actually not the worst measure out there. But I do believe that rental bans and caps are damaging to the market. I'm not criticising one government party over another. I think they've all done a terrible job at solving the housing crisis. I also think they were doing a terrible job at providing solutions or coming up with good ideas. I don't think there's any party out there that are putting forward credible ideas that will actually solve the problem. So what are the actual problems? The problems are high rent, unaffordable homes, urban sprawl and congestion. How do you go about solving that problem? Well, one way to solve that problem is by increasing the supply of affordable units within urban areas. Rental caps and bans are actually proven to reduce supply. So I don't understand why they'd be the first lever that a government party would wish to pull. They de-incentivise increasing supply, so why should they be considered at all? Some people will actually say, well, the ban is only there for 3 years and it's there to help us right now. Well, realistically, what you're doing is you're kicking the problem down the can and you're actually going to even reduce supply even further, creating an even bigger problem. Governments need to incentivise supply. There has been some very weak attempts at this in recent years. One of those attempts was to allow for the conversion of unused commercial space into residential space. That scheme has largely been unutilised, mainly because the cost of converting commercial space to residential space isn't feasible, mainly because of building and fire regs. So without adapting our building and fire regs to allow for these changes, this incentive just is never going to work. A slightly longer approach needs to be adapted. Right now, we only have one design standard for apartment blocks that are being built for owner-occupiers. That means that a huge amount of developments aren't feasible because the design standards and the building reg requirements that are put in place on apartment blocks right now here in Ireland make a huge amount of developments not feasible. There should actually be a number of different design standards available for developers to pick from. There should be a range of different design standards for residential apartment blocks. Some should be affordable apartments. They should allow for cutting out of car parking spaces or reducing storage or adding additional units on a floor, all in the efforts to actually make it affordable to build and affordable to buy. One of the reasons why we're actually seeing hotels, student accommodation, and now even build to rent schemes being developed here in Dublin is because their design standards allow them to be feasibly built. And I think we need more design standards for rental accommodation and for owner-occupier accommodation to allow those schemes to be actually built. Most people will be aware of an increase of new schemes coming onto the market that are going to be built to rent. The majority of these schemes are being built by American firms and pension funds. These developments will be serviced apartments and will command a very high rent. Such developments actually have been criticised quite a lot here in Dublin because they're not being built for owner-occupiers. But generally speaking, when you look at the market trends around the world, Dublin is way behind our serviced apartment numbers in terms of capital city, and we have a long way to go in terms of our serviced apartment numbers as a percentage of our rental accommodation to catch up with other major cities. So even right now, they only equate to a very small percentage of the total rental accommodation here in Dublin. I think it's less than 10%. But as there are more and more of these schemes actually being developed here in Dublin and other cities around Ireland, I think the government need to be clever here. And I think there's a real opportunity for the government to be clever here. I believe there's an opportunity for the government to request that 20% of the units that are built are available at affordable rents. And they can decide that tenants need to be means tested, or perhaps they're on government support for them to qualify for the 20% of apartments within these blocks. I'm not suggesting that we reduce developers' profit in any way in regards to making these developments less feasible. What I would do is to incentivize them to actually provide the extra 20%. I'd allow them to build higher, or even give them reduced contributions to the council. But I do think there is an opportunity for the government to be clever here, that all of these apartments don't have to be high end. Some of them can go to an affordable market if they're clever in it, if they offer incentives to allow developers to go ahead and do that. The government could also offer similar incentives to existing landlords who have large blocks, or small landlords, if they offer their apartments or their units to critical workers at affordable rents. And what I mean is that they offer local teachers, local guards, or local nurses affordable rents in areas that are suitable to where they're working. And by doing that, they, as a landlord, get a tax write-off or a tax credit if they provide that service. I do believe there is loads of ways to incentivise increased supply, and the government need to be clever about it. In my mind, incentives will solve the problem far faster than rental caps or rental bans. The only reason I think that governments don't offer incentives to landlords is because they're afraid. They're afraid of the media and they're afraid of the opposition, because they're afraid that the line will be that the government give tax breaks to wealthy landlords. And if they do this, they're afraid they'll lose votes. I believe you solve the problem by incentivising an increase in supply. You don't solve the problem by introducing rental bans or rental caps that will actually limit supply. You don't solve the problem by inaction due to fear of losing votes. And you don't solve the problem by creating bills that have no substance just for PR purposes. My main point is that there's better ideas out there. There has to be better ideas out there. And if you have a better idea, or if you have any idea that you think is worth actually considering, put it in the comments below. You're welcome to disagree with me on this. I think debate is healthy. Sometimes debate actually can bring about some really good ideas. So if you don't agree with some of my comments here, please put in your comments below and let me know. If you've enjoyed watching this video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't, I don't know why you stuck around till the very end, but give us a thumbs down. But as always, thanks for watching.